Hello and welcome to the JCFS training video, Avatar Incident Reports. We're glad you're here. For a list of the kinds of incidents that would require an incident report, please see your training manual. In this video, I'm going to show you how we record those incidents in Avatar. Not surprisingly, it is a form called Incident Report Entry, and we are going to select our client. We have a client in the therapeutic nursery named Bam Bam Flintstone, who tends to have some acting out issues. So here we are in the form of incident report entry. Here's the name of the client, a little bit of information about him. This is the incident report entry. These are the sections. This is our submit button. We can make this we can have this come up as my forms if this is something you use often, and this is the get me out of here please and don't save anything I've done, but we always are going to work in draft. The name of the person reporting the incident is usually the person who you are. It will always go to your supervisor. The next person it always goes to is our Chief Operating Officer, who is Margaret Vemont. This particular client is in the therapeutic nursery school, so I'm going to choose that. The location of the incident was in fact in that office at the Virginia Frank Child Development Center, and the incident happened yesterday. The time of the incident is relevant, and you need to pay attention to the time because when you want to run the report, you need to know at what hour it happened. So this actually happened at 11:30 a.m. and no other people were involved in this incident. If there had been, then there would have been a place to record information about that, how many people were involved, if they were staff, if they were not, and what happened in the incident. Because I have now completed this section, I'm going to go on. The next section is the child welfare incident. So if this were a foster care or a residential client, then all of this information would need to be recorded. What type of incident it was, whether it was suspected abuse or neglect of a child. If it wasn't one of these categories, then we would need to list out what category it was. If it was inappropriate caretaking, was it by JCFS staff or by non-staff? If it was inappropriate caretaking, what kind of inappropriate caretaking? A description of the other kinds if it didn't fall into one of these pre-created categories, and then what the primary incident type was. Then we would go down to the second subsection and talk about what was done. So did we do counseling? Was there medical service required, psychiatric hospitalization, etc.? Was there passive physical restraint done? And then a description of the action, and then a list of who was notified. So first would be the JCFS supervisor, then it may be that person's supervisor. It may be that we needed to make a hotline report. There are all sorts of options for who we would need. It may be OIG if this was someone who was disabled. We have 4 different possibilities in terms of listing out notification. Because this was not a client in foster care or residential, we will actually use the outpatient incident. But let me point out that you could also use the non-outpatient incident. So here's the outpatient incident, which would be appropriate for this client. And we're going to say that Bam Bam's displayed some highly disruptive behavior. There was no suspected abuse or neglect, so I don't need to specify that here. If I had, and if it had been suspected abuse or neglect and it hadn't fallen into one of these categories, then I would need to list out what it was. If it was suspected abuse or neglect of an elderly person, I would need to list that out. If it is dangerous behavior or a threat, who was that threat to? And then there needs to be a primary incident type. So we're going to say this is highly disruptive behavior. The action taken was other, and we're going to say the soothing chair used. I'm not sure that's actually the right language, but we'll use that here. And then we might say client was given 2 warnings and then placed in the self-restraint basket until calmer. And then who was notified? So the JCFS supervisor was notified, and that was done yesterday, and that supervisor was Oprah Winfrey. And in this case, another supervisor was notified also, And in this case, that was Ruth Fruhoff. And the last person in terms of JCFS who was notified was Margaret Vemont. And then the parent was notified, Wilma Flintstone. Because passive physical restraint was used, first we would describe the efforts made to avoid that. So, we spoke to Bam Bam, gave him verbal warnings. He was not able to calm down and continued to fight on the floor. We would go on to describe the passive physical restraint procedures used, who was involved in providing those, how long a time that was, so maybe it was 2, and then how the child responded. It didn't like 2 minutes, let's just go with 2. And then his behavior afterwards, and then if there were follow-up interventions. And if there were, then what they were. There are 2 places to record if there were multiple layers of efforts made to avoid. If the incident required a report to the Illinois Department on Aging for an elder abuse report, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services for child, IODC. IOG would also be reported for someone who was disabled. This form and this section of the form follows exactly the procedure that you would go through if you were making a report. Who made the hotline call? When did they call? What time? Who did they speak with? Was the call accepted or rejected? This is not a hotline call that we're using as an example, but let's walk through this. If the call, for instance, was rejected, then we would go down to this subsection and talk about what the reason was for the rejected and whether or not we appealed. Let's say we did not. Then those sections, the next fields would be grayed out. If we did appeal, then we would need to give the hotline supervisor name and the results of the appeal, and then what action was taken. Parents and legal guardians and caregivers, were they notified? Yes or no? So if not, then why not? If they were, then who did you talk to, when, and who spoke to them? If a JCFS staff member or a volunteer was accused, then you would click yes, and then we would need the name of the accused and the action taken. If not, those fields would gray out. If this is a foster care or residential client, then you would need to do a CRAP report. Was there a short-term safety plan developed? Yes. Describe it. No, you wouldn't need to. And any other comments. If this client were a client in TDS, the Therapeutic Day School, then we would use this multiple iteration table and we would put that information in. So we would click add new item so that we would have a line and the date of the timeout, which would have been yesterday. If the timeout was voluntary, was the student walked to the timeout, when it began, when it ended, if there was a staff member present, the name of that staff member, how they were during the timeout, their level of agitation, whether or not the door was open or closed during that timeout, and what the student did after the timeout. As you can see, we have this multiple iteration table because there may be multiple incidents of disruption in any given day in the Therapeutic Day School. Once you have completed all of the sections that are relevant for your client, you would click submit. You can then run an incident report. And again, because I didn't specify the client before I started, I'm going to have to locate the client through the search. And what you will notice is not only do you need the date of the incident, but you need the hour of the incident. This is a 2-digit number. So if it was, for instance, 1 o'clock, you would need to type in 01. In this case, it was 11 a.m. So I'm going to type this in and then I'm going to click process and it's going to run that report. And that is the way that you do an incident report. Thank you for watching this Avatar video. We hope you will join us for future videos. Goodbye.